Anna Gould was born on June 5, 1875, in New York City, the youngest daughter of the financier Jay Gould, whose railroad empire and speculative operations shaped the fortunes and controversies of America's Gilded Age. Today, Anna Gould is chiefly remembered as the American heiress, whose $10 million dowry symbolized the high tide of transatlantic marriages between new American fortunes and the declining nobility of Europe. But before she became a countess in France, before her dowry became a matter of international scrutiny and legal precedent, Anna Gould was a product of American industrial ambition and family rivalry. Before her name was linked to palatial estates, public extravagance, and legal battles, she was a sheltered heiress whose inheritance represented both a shield and a challenge within elite society. This documentary traces the full arc of Anna Gould's journey from New York legacy to European aristocracy, examining the economic structures underpinning her fortune, negotiations and legalities of her marriage, the consequences of public spectacle and private discord, and the long-term ramifications for law, gender, and class on both sides of the Atlantic. Before we begin, please comment where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to know that this story is being watched from all around the globe. Anna Gould's life was inseparable from the financial empire constructed by her father, Jay Gould, whose career unfolded during the most volatile decades of 19th century American industrial expansion. Born on May 27, 1836, in Roxbury, New York, Jay Gould rose from modest origins to become one of the most powerful and controversial financiers of the Gilded Age. By the 1860s, he was deeply involved in railroad consolidation, stock speculation, and corporate control, particularly through his influence over the Erie Railroad, the Union Pacific, and the Wabash system. These ventures placed him at the center of repeated legal disputes, congressional investigations, and public criticism, while simultaneously generating extraordinary private wealth. The structure of the Gould fortune was shaped by both opportunity and defensive planning. Jay Gould operated within a legal environment that permitted aggressive speculation, stock watering, and complex trust arrangements. By the 1880s, he had reorganized significant portions of his holdings into family-controlled trusts, designed to insulate assets from hostile takeovers, lawsuits, and political intervention. These arrangements were not symbolic. They were documented legal mechanisms overseen by attorneys, trustees, and financial institutions in New York, ensuring continuity beyond Gould's lifetime. Anna Gould, born in New York City on June 5, 1875, entered this financial framework as the youngest of Jay Gould's children. Her inheritance prospects were shaped long before his death. By the late 1880s, Jay Gould had already allocated substantial portions of his estate to his children through structured trusts, bonds, and equity holdings. These instruments generated predictable income while limiting direct control by heirs, a measure intended to preserve capital across generations. Jay Gould died on December 2, 1892, leaving an estate valued at approximately $72 million, a figure that placed the family among the wealthiest in the United States. Anna's share, managed through trustees, was estimated at roughly $10 million, excluding future income streams. This inheritance was not liquid cash, but a carefully distributed portfolio of securities, railroad interests, and investment income. The distinction mattered. It shaped how Anna's wealth could be accessed, spent, or transferred, particularly in the context of marriage. Public perception of the Gould fortune differed sharply from its legal reality. Newspapers frequently characterized the family's wealth as predatory or unstable, reflecting long-standing resentment toward Jay Gould's business methods. This reputation followed Anna into adulthood, influencing how her inheritance was viewed both domestically and abroad. In European aristocratic circles, the source of the money mattered less than its reliability. In American society, the name Gould carried unresolved controversy. These conditions framed Anna Gould's position as an heiress. At the moment she entered international society, her wealth was immense but constrained, powerful but supervised, and inseparable from a legacy that remained politically and socially contested. The financial architecture created by her father did not merely fund her future. It defined the legal, social, and marital negotiations that would soon follow, shaping every subsequent decision made on her behalf. By the closing decades of the 19th century, a discernible pattern emerged among the upper echelons of American society, as a significant number of wealthy families began to pursue marital alliances with the European aristocracy. This phenomenon, later characterized as the dollar princess era, was neither accidental nor purely social in its motivations. It was a development born from simultaneous economic pressures in Europe and social aspirations in the United States. American fortunes, often the result of rapid industrialization, speculative investment, and occasionally public controversy, were increasingly regarded as viable resources by European families seeking to sustain ancestral estates, uphold social obligations, and navigate the consequences of declining agricultural revenues and rising taxation. The practical mechanics of these transatlantic marriages were shaped by travel advances, such as regular transoceanic steamship routes connecting New York and major territories, European ports by the 1880s, and by the establishment of social intermediaries, professional matchmakers, expatriate socialites, and diplomatic channels facilitated the introductions between American heiresses and European noblemen. Notable marriages, such as those of Consuelo Vanderbilt to the Duke of Marlborough in 1895 and Mary Leiter to Lord Curzon in 1895, established a template for the negotiation and public announcement of dowries, marital settlements, and the preservation of titles and property. For American families, the attraction lay in the prospect of social elevation and international recognition. Titles, coats of arms, and ancestral residences represented forms of legitimacy often unavailable within the fluid class structure of the United States. For the European aristocracy, new American wealth offered a solution to fiscal shortfalls that threatened the maintenance of estates, the employment of retainers, and the hosting of required social events. The financial terms of these unions were frequently explicit. Dowries were specified in legal contracts, often with clauses governing their use, inheritance, and the consequences of marital dissolution. Anna Gould's emergence as a potential bride in this context reflected both her family's financial status and the precedents established by her peers. Her dowry, estimated at $10 million, was of a magnitude sufficient to attract serious attention from continental noble families, many of whom had already entered into similar arrangements with American counterparts. The process was neither purely transactional nor wholly personal. Negotiations involved lawyers, bankers, and family advisors on both sides, with careful attention to currency exchange rates, legal jurisdiction, and the enforceability of transnational agreements. Public commentary on these marriages was often divided. American newspapers alternated between patriotic pride and concern over the export of national wealth. European observers, for their part, expressed skepticism regarding the integration of new money and foreign customs into established hierarchies. Social chroniclers documented not only the ceremonies and public receptions, but also the practical challenges that accompanied these unions, such as differences in language, religion, and expectations of marital roles. The experience of earlier American heiresses served as both guide and warning to Anna Gould and her family. Legal disputes, failed marriages, and contested inheritances had already demonstrated the risks involved in these alliances. At the same time, the successful establishment of Americans in British, French, and Italian high society suggested that, under the right circumstances, such marriages could secure both status and stability. By the time Anna Gould's engagement was considered, the transatlantic marriage market was both institutionalized and fraught with complexities that would shape every stage of her subsequent negotiations and public life. The confluence of economic necessity and social ambition ensured that the pattern of American heiresses marrying into the European nobility would remain a defining feature of the era. For Anna Gould, this context was not background but a central determinant of her path forward, setting the terms, expectations, and scrutiny that would govern the next phase of her life. Anna Gould's upbringing unfolded within the highly structured and scrutinized environment of late 19th century New York high society. Born on June 5, 1875, she was raised at the Gould family's Fifth Avenue residence, a location that served as both sanctuary and stage for the complexities of Gilded Age wealth. The daily realities of her childhood were shaped by a combination of private instruction, domestic supervision, and restricted access to the world beyond tightly controlled family and social circles. Her education was overseen by governesses and tutors selected for their adherence to standards of propriety and accomplishment, reflecting the Gould family's desire to project both cultural refinement and institutional respectability. The administration of Anna's inheritance was established through the legal instruments crafted by her father, Jay Gould, in the final years of his life. The trusts and stipulations governing her assets were designed to protect her share of the estate from dissipation, litigation, or unsuitable alliances. These provisions reflected not only legal prudence, but also a broader anxiety among the American elite regarding the preservation of family fortunes in an era of rapid social change and public scrutiny. Anna's financial circumstances, while considerable, were therefore subject to oversight by trustees, family members, and legal counsel, limiting her direct autonomy. Public awareness of Anna's status as an heiress was reinforced by regular press coverage, often positioning her as a symbol of the tensions between inherited wealth and social responsibility. Reports on her social debut, charitable contributions, and family activities appeared in both society columns and financial pages, underscoring the extent to which her life was understood as a matter of public interest. These articles often highlighted her modesty, discretion, and sense of duty, presenting a carefully managed image intended to counterbalance the persistent criticisms of her father's legacy. The expectations placed on Anna as she approached adulthood extended beyond personal conduct to the strategic use of marriage as a tool for social consolidation or advancement. Within elite New York society, marital alliances were frequently regarded as instruments for securing or enhancing family standing. The Gould family, conscious of its contested reputation, exercised particular caution in vetting potential suitors and negotiating the terms of engagement. This process, while ostensibly private, was influenced by broader currents in American and European society, as well as by the legal structures governing dowries, trusts, and inheritance rights. Anna's initial involvement in charitable organizations and philanthropic events was encouraged as a means of cultivating social connections and demonstrating the family's commitment to public service. Participation in such activities also served to familiarize her with the institutional frameworks and interpersonal dynamics that would later become central to her role in transatlantic society. The pattern of closely supervised socialization, combined with incremental exposure to public functions, reinforced her status as both a representative of the Gould fortune and a potential target for strategic alliances. By the time Anna Gould reached her late teens, the intersection of wealth, gender, and expectation had produced an environment in which every decision carried potential legal, financial, and reputational consequences. The framework established for her upbringing, blending privilege with limitation, provided her with access to resources and opportunities unavailable to most, but also imposed constraints that would shape her subsequent negotiations and personal choices. As she moved toward adulthood and eventual entry into European aristocratic circles, the legacy of her childhood remained a defining influence, setting parameters for her autonomy and laying the groundwork for the challenges to come. Count Boni de Castellane was born on February 14, 1867 in Paris, into a lineage of old French nobility whose origins traced back to the medieval era. The Castellane family had, for centuries, occupied a distinguished place within the French aristocracy, with estates in Provence and deep connections to political and military institutions of the Ancien Régime. However, by the closing decades of the 19th century, the family's fortunes, like those of many aristocratic houses, had diminished significantly as a result of agricultural decline, successive waves of revolution, and the transformation of France's economic foundations. The Castellanes, while retaining their titles and social privileges, found their material resources and political influence increasingly circumscribed by these developments. Boni's early years reflected both the privileges and constraints of his class. Educated at prestigious institutions and introduced to court life at an early age, he was familiar with the social expectations attached to his family's name. However, the Castellane estate, centered around the Château de Rochefort and other properties, faced mounting debts and required regular infusions of capital simply to maintain basic operations. By the late 1880s, the family was engaged in complex negotiations with creditors, selling off parcels of land and heirlooms to meet obligations. The economic realities of this period left Boni with the status of a count, but without the financial security that had once underpinned aristocratic independence. Within Parisian society, Boni distinguished himself through charm, wit, and a facility for social navigation. He became a fixture in the salons of the capital, forging relationships with influential figures in the arts, politics, and the press. His participation in elite clubs and frequent presence at cultural events allowed him to maintain the visibility expected of his lineage. Nevertheless, the lack of substantial personal fortune created a persistent tension between public image and private constraint. Accounts from contemporaries documented Boni's skill at leveraging his connections to secure credit and maintain appearances, but also noted the growing risks associated with this strategy as his personal debts accumulated. The economic pressures facing Boni and his family coincided with the rise of American heiresses as sought-after prospects in European marriage markets. By the early 1890s, the Castellanes, like many families of their station, regarded marriage to an American fortune as a rational and necessary step to secure their position. The search for a wealthy bride was not solely a personal decision, but rather a calculated response to institutional pressures, including the maintenance of estates, the fulfillment of family obligations, and the preservation of social rank in an increasingly competitive environment. Letters and memoirs from the period record discussions among family members regarding the advantages and challenges of such alliances. Boni's courtship of Anna Gould began in this context. His visits to the United States and interactions with the Gould family were shaped by a combination of personal charm and strategic intent. The Castellanes approached the negotiations with careful attention to legal, financial, and reputational considerations, seeking assurances regarding the terms of the dowry and the management of assets. Anna's wealth, carefully structured by trusts and legal instruments, represented both an opportunity and a challenge, requiring complex arrangements to satisfy the interests of all parties involved. These negotiations were conducted with the involvement of bankers, attorneys, and family advisors, highlighting the institutional dimension of what was, in public, presented as a romantic union. The Castellane family's willingness to accept the social risks associated with an American marriage reflected broader patterns in European aristocracy during this period. The decline in agricultural revenues, coupled with new forms of wealth and influence emerging from industrial and financial sectors, forced adaptation and realignment of strategies for survival. Boni's decision to pursue Anna Gould did not signal a rejection of tradition, but rather an attempt to reconcile inherited status with the economic imperatives of modernity. The chapter in which Boni became engaged to Anna marked a turning point in both families' histories, setting in motion the series of events that would define the fortunes and public perception of the Castellane-Gould union for decades to follow. Negotiations for the marriage between Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane began in earnest in late 1894, and quickly developed into a protracted process involving both families' legal advisors, financial representatives, and selected intermediaries. The central issue from the outset was the structuring and protection of Anna's dowry. The initial sum, set at $10 million, far exceeded the typical scale for transatlantic marriages of the era and required unprecedented legal scrutiny on both sides of the Atlantic. The size of the dowry reflected not only the magnitude of the Gould fortune, but also the acute financial needs of the Castellane family, whose estates and lifestyle depended on an immediate and substantial infusion of capital. The legal framework established for the transfer of Anna's dowry was complex, with contracts drafted under both American and French jurisdiction. The agreements specified the nature and timing of payments, the designation of allowable investments, and the conditions under which property or funds could revert to Anna in the event of separation or widowhood. The contracts also contained clauses regarding the inheritance and administration of any assets derived from the dowry, as well as provisions intended to limit the exposure of the Gould family's principal estate to the debts or legal actions of the Castellanes. Every stipulation was subject to negotiation, with particular attention given to the differing legal standards governing marital property in the United States and France. The practical negotiations took place in a context of heightened public and press interest. News of the proposed alliance circulated in both American and French newspapers, generating speculation about the motivations of both parties and the likely fate of the fortune involved. The involvement of high-profile attorneys and the visible movement of funds across international boundaries ensured that every stage of the process was documented and, at times, critiqued by contemporaries. The need for secrecy, especially regarding the specific financial terms, was frequently compromised by leaks and informal disclosures. The Castellane family, represented in negotiations by senior relatives and legal counsel, pressed for terms that would maximize their immediate access to liquid assets. Their position was shaped by the urgent necessity of settling outstanding debts, stabilizing their estates, and restoring the financial capacity required to participate in Parisian society at the expected level. The Gould family, by contrast, insisted on provisions to protect Anna's personal interests, including restrictions on the sale of principal assets and a formal accounting of expenditures to be submitted at regular intervals. These safeguards reflected the experience of previous American heiresses, whose fortunes had sometimes been dissipated or lost through poorly supervised transfers. By early 1840s, the terms of the dowry agreement had been finalized. The legal instruments provided for an initial cash payment, accompanied by securities and periodic allowances, all overseen by a board of trustees acting in Anna's interest. Specific instructions detailed the permissible uses of dowry funds, limiting investments in speculative ventures, and mandating the maintenance of a reserve for Anna's personal expenses and charitable work. French law recognized the arrangement as a contractual marriage, subject to registration and periodic review by local authorities. The finalization of the dowry and associated legal documents represented not merely the resolution of a private matter, but the establishment of a precedent in the emerging field of international marital law. The mechanisms developed for the Gould-Castellane marriage were subsequently cited in later negotiations involving American and European families, and influenced legal reforms concerning the management and disposition of dowries in cases of divorce or inheritance. The process underscored the increasing intersection between private fortune and public regulation at the turn of the century, and set the stage for the highly visible wedding and subsequent financial decisions that would define Anna Gould's early years as Countess de Castellane. On March 14, 1895, Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane were married at the Church of Saint-Honoré d'Eylau in Paris, marking the culmination of extensive negotiations and months of transatlantic preparation. The event immediately drew the attention of both American and European media, as much for the scale of its ceremony as for its symbolic representation of a transnational union between new American wealth and established French nobility. Invitations were distributed to leading members of the French aristocracy, diplomats, prominent expatriates, and figures from the financial world, while reporters secured vantage points both inside and outside the church to record details of the proceedings. The preparations for the wedding were extensive and meticulous, reflecting the dual imperatives of social display and institutional legitimacy. Floral arrangements were imported from the south of France, and a noted Parisian designer was commissioned to create Anna's gown and accompanying attire for the bridal party. The church itself was redecorated for the occasion, with additional seating installed to accommodate the large number of invited guests and observers. Security was discreet but present, a response to the press attention and the family's desire to maintain decorum during the public aspects of the ceremony. The marriage service was conducted according to both French Catholic rites and the protocols required for the registration of foreign marriages under French civil law. Witnesses included representatives of both families, as well as legal officials responsible for confirming the execution of marriage contracts. The ceremony proceeded without incident, but the atmosphere was marked by the awareness that the event carried significance far beyond the personal union of the bride and groom. For Parisian society, the wedding was a confirmation of the continuing relevance of the aristocracy, even as it relied on external sources of wealth. For American observers, it's as proof of the international standing now enjoyed by the leading families of the Gilded Age. Following the church ceremony, a reception was held at a prominent Parisian residence, attended by several hundred guests. The event was noted for its elaborate menu, orchestral music, and carefully staged introductions of prominent attendees. Press coverage described in detail the presentation of wedding gifts, many of which were of historic or artistic value, as well as the distribution of commemorative programs to selected guests. The social calendar for the week following the wedding included additional receptions, formal dinners, and a series of private audiences with senior members of the French nobility. In both France and the United States, coverage of the wedding was accompanied by commentary on the implications for class, nationality, and the changing nature of marriage among elites. Editorials contrasted the restraint and dignity of the ceremony with the scale of the dowry and the public interest in the financial terms. American newspapers in particular speculated on the long-term consequences for the Gould family's reputation and for future transatlantic alliances. French commentators remarked on the revitalization of aristocratic fortunes and the apparent willingness of American heiresses to accept the obligations of noble life. The immediate aftermath of the wedding established Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane as a leading couple in Parisian society. Their appearances at social events, their residency at notable addresses, and their increasing involvement in charitable and cultural activities were all closely monitored by the press. The wedding did not merely signal the beginning of a personal relationship. It inaugurated a period of heightened scrutiny and expectation, in which every public act was interpreted as evidence of either success or discord. The Parisian wedding thus functioned as both a social event and a public institution, confirming the legal, financial, and reputational arrangements that had preceded it. The success of the ceremony, its scale, and its reception in both France and the United States established a template for subsequent marriages between American heiresses and European aristocrats, reinforcing the structures and expectations that would shape Anna Gould's experience as Countess de Castellane in the years to come. In the months following their marriage, Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane quickly established themselves as prominent figures within the upper echelons of Parisian society. The couple's social calendar became densely populated with engagements, ranging from formal receptions at their own residences to invitations extended by established families, diplomats, and artistic circles. The couple's entree into French high society was facilitated by the novelty of their union, a blend of American financial power and French noble lineage, which attracted a steady stream of curiosity and attention from both peers and the press. Each appearance was documented in detail by Parisian newspapers, which noted the presence of key figures and provided commentary on the costumes, decorations, and level of extravagance displayed at each event. The expenditures associated with maintaining this public profile were substantial, drawing from the funds made available through Anna's dowry and the arrangements negotiated prior to the marriage. Boni embarked on a campaign of social display that was both ambitious and costly. Major investments included the hosting of large-scale balls, the acquisition of artwork, and the purchase of luxury goods intended to reinforce the image of Castellane family affluence. Particular attention was paid to the couple's attendance at the opera, the horse races at Longchamp, and the major exhibitions of the Parisian social season. These activities were not only expressions of personal taste, but deliberate strategies for reinforcing the Castellane name within an evolving aristocratic hierarchy. In addition to public entertainments, significant sums were allocated to the renovation and furnishing of the couple's residences. The acquisition and transformation of a mansion in Paris's affluent 16th arrondissement became a focal point of both social ambition and financial outlay. Architects and decorators were commissioned to modernize interiors, add amenities, and showcase collections of fine art and antiques. The project, regularly featured in society columns, was regarded as a reflection of the couple's aspirations to rival the grandeur of older, established houses in the city. While the scale of these expenditures initially secured the couple's position among the elite, it also attracted increasing scrutiny from observers concerned about the long-term sustainability of such a lifestyle. Commentators, both in the press and within social circles, began to raise questions regarding the rapid pace at which the Castellane Gould resources were being spent. The balance between public celebration and private reserve became a matter of discussion, with comparisons drawn to other American heiresses whose fortunes had proved vulnerable to similar patterns of conspicuous consumption. Anna's integration into Parisian society was not without challenges. Although her financial resources opened doors and secured invitations, she continued to face barriers rooted in differences of language, custom, and the lingering perceptions of American new money among certain segments of the French elite. The maintenance of a large domestic staff, including English-speaking secretaries and tutors, was required to manage correspondence, household operations, and the ongoing process of cultural adaptation. Anna's participation in philanthropic and charitable organizations was encouraged by her advisors as a means of establishing her reputation beyond the realm of social entertainment. Despite these obstacles, the early years of Anna's marriage to Boni were marked by a period of considerable influence and visibility. The couple's ability to command attention, set trends in fashion and society, and cultivate relationships with artists, writers, and political figures helped to shape the narrative of transatlantic integration at the fin de siècle. However, beneath the surface of outward success, the patterns of expenditure, the strains of cultural negotiation, and the persistent demands of public life laid the groundwork for the financial and personal difficulties that would become increasingly apparent in the years ahead. As the Castellane Gould marriage entered its next phase, the limits of wealth as a tool for acceptance and stability would come into sharper focus, with implications for both family fortunes and broader patterns of social change. Shortly after their marriage, Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane embarked on a project that would come to symbolize both their social ambition and the extraordinary expenditures of the Castellane Gould union, the construction of the Palais Rose. Located on Avenue Foch in Paris, the residence was conceived as a modern interpretation of the Grand Trianon at Versailles, intended to serve not only as the couple's principal home but also as a setting for lavish gatherings and a visible statement of wealth and taste. The project began in 1896, with Boni personally overseeing the selection of architects, contractors, and artisans. Renowned designers were engaged to translate the couple's vision into reality, and no expense was spared in the choice of materials, furnishings, or decorative schemes. The Palais Rose's design and construction rapidly attracted attention in both social and architectural circles. Columns of pink marble, ornate moldings, and expansive galleries set the residence apart from other Parisian homes of the period. Each phase of the building process was documented in contemporary newspapers and society journals, with regular updates on costs, contractors, and anticipated completion dates. The property's grounds were landscaped by celebrated horticulturists, while interior spaces were furnished with collections of fine art, antique tapestries, and custom-made pieces commissioned specifically for the residents. The overall effect was one of ostentation and innovation, reinforcing the Castellane-Gould couple's reputation for extravagance. From the outset, the maintenance and staffing requirements for the Palais Rose were substantial. A large retinue of servants, chefs, gardeners, and security staff was employed to operate the household and support the regular schedule of entertainments hosted at the residence. The scale of the property demanded ongoing investment in upkeep and security, as well as periodic renovations to accommodate evolving tastes or repair the effects of heavy use. The operational costs quickly became a source of concern among family advisors, who warned of the long-term financial implications of sustaining such a property. The Palais Rose served as the venue for a succession of high-profile social events. Balls, charity galas, and receptions for visiting dignitaries were staged in its salons, with guest lists featuring leading figures from politics, the arts, and the nobility. Press coverage of these gatherings emphasized the interplay between American resources and French tradition, framing the residence as a unique cultural and social experiment. For Anna and Boni, the Palais Rose was not simply a home, but an instrument of influence within the shifting hierarchy of Parisian society. However, the rapid escalation of expenses associated with the construction, decoration, and operation of the Palais Rose placed increasing strain on the Castellane-Gould finances. Annual outlays far exceeded initial estimates, with overruns attributed to both Boni's ambitions and the rising costs of imported materials and specialized labor. Accountants and trustees responsible for monitoring Anna's assets issued regular warnings about the diminishing reserves available for other purposes. These reports, circulated among family members and legal advisors, highlighted the potential risks posed by continued expansion and unchecked expenditure. The completion of the Palais Rose in the early 1900s marked both a high point and an inflection point for the couple. While the residents succeeded in establishing Anna and Boni as major figures in Parisian society, it also cemented their reputation for extravagance and set a precedent for future conflicts over money and priorities. The property would later become a focal point in legal disputes and a symbol of the vulnerabilities inherent in the blending of American wealth with European aristocratic tradition. The experience of building and maintaining the Palais Rose demonstrated the opportunities and limitations associated with social integration by means of conspicuous consumption, providing a clear illustration of the challenges facing transatlantic unions in an era of profound change. By the early 1900s, the spectacle of Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane's lifestyle, exemplified by the Palais Rose and their continuous public expenditures, began to generate significant criticism from multiple quarters. The couple's finances, once regarded as inexhaustible, became the subject of increasing concern among advisors, creditors, and family trustees as annual deficits mounted and debt obligations multiplied. Newspapers in Paris and New York, which had previously chronicled the Castellane-Gould entertainments with a tone of admiration or curiosity, shifted their focus to the scale of the spending and the apparent lack of restraint. Articles began to document not only the outlays for art, travel, and renovations, but also the growing number of creditors seeking payment for goods and services rendered to the couple. The shifting public narrative was reinforced by satirical commentary and caricature, which appeared in widely read journals, and lampooned the Castellane's extravagance. Editorials questioned the social utility of such consumption and warned of the dangers associated with dependence on a single fortune, especially one controlled by legal trustees with fiduciary obligations to protect principal over display. The Gould family's advisors, both in the United States and France, issued increasingly urgent communications to Anna, outlining the deteriorating financial position and calling for immediate reductions in expenditures. These warnings were often accompanied by legal analyses detailing the limits of the dowry and the risks posed by continued borrowing against future income or principal. Privately, tensions within the Castellane-Gould marriage deepened as the financial pressures mounted. Boni's approach to spending, characterized by grand gestures and continual reinvestment in social standing, clashed with Anna's efforts, often guided by her trustees, to introduce more conservative financial management. Family. Correspondence from this period reveals growing frustration on both sides. Anna's relatives in America pressed her to exert greater control over the couple's finances, while members of the Castellane family raised concerns about the long-term reputation of their house. Should insolvency or public scandal ensue, the couple's creditors responded to missed payments and delayed settlements with formal legal actions. Lawsuits were filed in Parisian courts, and notices of outstanding debts were served on the couple's residences. The resulting publicity amplified the sense of crisis, undermining the couple's standing in social circles and further complicating their access to credit. As the situation became more acute, Anna's legal representatives invoked the protective clauses of her marriage contracts, seeking to limit further liability and shield her remaining assets from seizure or forced sale. These measures, while necessary, contributed to a perception of instability and vulnerability. The cumulative effect of public criticism and private discord was a pronounced shift in the social environment surrounding Anna and Boni. Invitations to major events declined, and some families distanced themselves from the couple, citing concerns about association with financial improvidence. Commentators noted the contrast between the early years of the marriage, marked by acceptance and emulation, and the emerging period of isolation and caution. Within Parisian society, the Castellane-Gould example became a cautionary tale, cited in discussions of the limits of American capital as a tool for aristocratic renewal and the dangers of over-reliance on spectacle. The backlash also influenced debates in American society about the wisdom of transatlantic marriages and the stewardship of inherited wealth. Legal experts and social commentators used the Castellane-Gould case as an illustration of the potential perils facing heiresses, whose fortunes were subject to foreign laws and customs. These discussions prompted calls for greater oversight of marital contracts and more explicit safeguards against asset dissipation in future alliances. The rising criticism did not immediately resolve the couple's difficulties, but marked the beginning of a new phase in which scrutiny, legal action, and financial distress would dominate the Castellane-Gould narrative, setting the stage for the crises that would follow. By 1902, mounting financial pressures and public scrutiny had begun to erode the foundations of Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane's marriage. The accumulation of debt, legal warnings from Anna's trustees, and frequent confrontations with creditors placed the couple under constant strain. Within the household, the tension manifested as disputes over expenditures, priorities, and personal conduct. Correspondence between Anna and her American advisors reveals that she was urged repeatedly to exercise restraint and assert more authority over financial decisions, while letters from members of the Castellane family document their own frustrations with Boni's increasingly erratic management, and public behavior. As financial difficulties became unavoidable, the Castellane-Gould marriage entered a period of visible discord. Boni's approach to social life, marked by a steady continuation of lavish entertainments and public displays, clashed with Anna's growing concern for the preservation of remaining assets. Instances of disagreement over major purchases, further investment in the Palais Rose, and the extension of credit to personal associates became frequent topics of argument. Reports from household staff and associates later entered into legal proceedings, detailed repeated disputes, periods of non-communication, and the gradual retreat of Anna from shared social obligations. Her absences from major public functions were noted by the press and interpreted as signs of crisis within the union. External pressures compounded these private disagreements. The legal structures protecting Anna's dowry required periodic audits and reporting, and by 1903, trustees had begun to withhold approvals for new disbursements or major transactions. The refusal of further advances was met by Boni with frustration, leading him to pursue alternative arrangements, including new lines of credit and appeals to Castellane relatives for assistance. These measures were largely unsuccessful, and creditors' actions escalated from polite requests to formal demands and litigation. The couple's deteriorating finances became the subject of gossip among Parisian society, diminishing the Castellane Goulds' standing and further isolating them from former allies. Personal differences between Anna and Boni became more pronounced as the practical consequences of financial decline took hold. Witness accounts submitted in later court proceedings described extended separations within the same residence, heated arguments regarding the future of their children, and divergent attitudes toward public reputation versus private stability. Anna, increasingly reliant on legal counsel and trustees, began to explore options for greater control over her remaining fortune and the welfare of her children. Discussions of separation and the possibility of divorce, rare and often scandalous in aristocratic circles, were broached with growing frequency. Throughout this period, the press in both France and the United States reported extensively on the Castellane Gould marriage, citing unnamed sources and providing detailed commentary on each new development. The level of coverage not only amplified the sense of public spectacle, but also contributed to the intensification of the couple's private conflicts. Anna's position was complicated by her status as a foreigner, subject to both French legal norms and the expectations of her American advisors. Boni, faced with diminishing resources and declining influence, struggled to maintain the lifestyle and social prominence that had defined the early years of the marriage. By the end of 1904, the breakdown in trust, mutual resentment over financial management, and the collapse of their public image had produced an impasse. The marriage, once celebrated as a model of transatlantic union, had become a case study in the vulnerabilities inherent in blending differing legal systems, social traditions, and economic priorities. The stage was set for a series of legal actions and public revelations that would further define the fate of both Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane, and serve as precedent for similar unions in the years to follow. By 1905, the Castellane Gould household had reached a point of financial instability that could no longer be contained through borrowing, credit extensions, or internal negotiations. The costs associated with maintaining the Palais rose, servicing debts accrued from years of extravagant living, and meeting ongoing social and familial obligations outpaced all available income from Anna Gould's trust and dowry. Reports from family advisors and trustees outlined the unsustainable nature of their expenditures, noting that annual deficits routinely exceeded previous estimates and that new sources of funds were virtually unattainable, given the couple's already significant liabilities. The mechanisms designed to protect Anna's inheritance, including contractual stipulations, oversight by trustees, and restrictions on asset transfers, now became critical factors in the unfolding crisis. By mid-1905, the trustees overseeing Anna's dowry and related assets began to refuse additional requests for funds, invoking specific clauses that required preservation of capital and prohibited further borrowing against principal. Communications between the trustees and legal counsel documented the exhaustion of available reserves for discretionary spending and outlined procedures for limiting Anna's exposure to further claims. This defensive posture reflected both fiduciary responsibility and the growing awareness that legal intervention would soon be necessary to prevent the complete depletion of Anna's fortune. Simultaneously, creditors who had provided goods, services, and loans to the Castellane Goulds initiated a series of formal actions to recover outstanding debts. Lawsuits were filed in Parisian courts seeking payment for unpaid bills related to construction, furnishings, luxury goods, and the costs of social events. Several of these claims were substantial, with documentation submitted to the court itemizing years of purchases and interest accrued on unpaid balances. Legal proceedings quickly attracted the attention of the press, further damaging the couple's reputation and accelerating the loss of credit within elite circles. The financial collapse had immediate consequences for the management of the Palais Rose. Faced with mounting legal and operational costs, the couple was compelled to curtail many social functions and reduce household staff. Assets within the residence, including valuable works of art, antiques, and decorative items, were inventoried and in some cases liquidated to satisfy pressing obligations. These measures, while necessary, proved insufficient to address the scale of the crisis. The sale of assets at public auction, reported in both French and American newspapers, signaled the extent of the couple's difficulties and marked a significant shift in their social standing. Within the Castellane and Gould families, the response to the financial crisis was characterized by blame, recrimination, and efforts to assign responsibility for the losses incurred. Letters exchanged among relatives and advisors revealed differing assessments of the causes. Some focused on Boni's spending, others on the risks inherent in transatlantic marriages, and still others on the inadequacies of legal safeguards. The situation underscored the challenges of managing large fortunes across national borders and within differing legal regimes, a problem that would be debated in legal and financial circles for years to come. As the scale of the collapse became clear, Anna Gould and her advisors recognized that further attempts at private negotiation were futile. The failure of previous efforts to impose restraint, the exhaustion of available credit, and the proliferation of legal actions forced the family to consider formal separation and litigation as the only viable means of preserving what remained of Anna's estate. The events of 1905 thus marked the transition from a period of financial improvisation to one of legal confrontation, with consequences that would extend beyond the immediate parties and set precedent for future cases involving international marriages, dowries, and asset protection. In early 1906, Anna Gould, with the support of her American trustees and legal counsel, initiated formal legal proceedings to separate from Count Boni de Castellane. The decision was the product of prolonged financial distress, failed attempts at reconciliation, and mounting evidence that continued association posed an unacceptable risk to Anna's remaining assets and social standing. The separation was sought under French law, which provided specific mechanisms for marital dissolution in cases of cruelty, financial mismanagement, or irreconcilable conflict. The move marked a dramatic shift in the Castellane-Gould narrative, drawing immediate attention from the French and American press, who covered the case in unprecedented detail. The legal process began with the filing of petitions in the French civil courts, accompanied by extensive documentation from Anna's advisors and witnesses. Affidavits detailed the financial improvidence that had characterized the marriage, including lists of unpaid debts, court judgments, and the forced sale of valuable property from the Palais Rose. Testimony from household staff and professional associates described patterns of conflict, isolation, and persistent disputes over money and public reputation. The petitions emphasized the steps taken by Anna to protect her children and to satisfy the legal requirements for separation, including repeated efforts at private negotiation and mediation, all of which had proved unsuccessful. Count Boni de Castellane responded to the proceedings by challenging Anna's claims and asserting his own rights under the terms of their marriage contract. His legal team argued that the marriage had provided tangible social and cultural benefits to Anna, and that the financial difficulties were the result of broader economic conditions rather than personal malfeasance. The arguments presented in court were accompanied by public statements to the press, in which Boni sought to defend his reputation and position himself as a victim of both circumstance and the alleged overreach of American financial interests. The trial unfolded over several months, with each development closely followed in newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic. Reports highlighted the personal and institutional stakes involved, with particular attention given to the implications for transatlantic marriages and the responsibilities of trustees in safeguarding dowry assets. Legal experts offered commentary on the novelty and significance of the proceedings, noting the extent to which the case tested the limits of existing law and established new ground for future litigation involving marital property and foreign nationals. The scandal surrounding the legal separation was amplified by the publication of private correspondence, court transcripts, and summaries of witness statements. Both families were subject to renewed scrutiny, with commentators dissecting the causes of the marriage's collapse and speculating about its implications for other American heiresses and European aristocrats. The unfolding case provided a rare glimpse into the private workings of elite society, revealing the complexities of wealth management, marital negotiation, and the struggle for public credibility amid personal crisis. By late 1906, the court reached its decision, granting Anna Gould a legal separation and recognizing her claims regarding the mismanagement of her assets. The judgment placed formal restrictions on Boni's access to the remaining estate and authorized Anna to pursue further legal remedies in the event of continued non-compliance. The ruling marked a turning point in the Gould-Castellane saga, affirming the ability of American trustees and French courts to cooperate in the protection of transnational wealth and setting a precedent for similar cases in the years to follow. The consequences of the legal proceedings, both for the immediate parties and for the broader patterns of international marriage, would continue to reverberate throughout the next phase of Anna Gould's life. The conclusion of Anna Gould's legal separation from Count Boni de Castellane was followed by negotiations to finalize a divorce settlement, a process that unfolded in 1907 and was characterized by extensive legal maneuvering on both sides. The terms of the settlement were shaped by French civil law, the unique contractual provisions established at the time of the marriage, and the ongoing intervention of Anna's American trustees. The court's judgment, which formed the legal foundation for the final agreement, determined the allocation of remaining assets, the disposition of marital property, and the arrangements for child custody and future support. A primary concern throughout the settlement process was the preservation of Anna Gould's remaining wealth. Legal counsel representing Anna worked in close consultation with the original trustees, ensuring that the safeguards built into the dowry contracts were recognized and enforced by the French authorities. The court accepted arguments that the dowry, while partially dissipated, should remain under the protection of the original legal instruments and ordered the restitution of assets and funds where possible. Boni's claims for further financial support were dismissed, with the court finding that his mismanagement of marital funds constituted sufficient cause for limiting his future access to Gould resources. Provisions for the custody and upbringing of the couple's 3 children were a central aspect of the settlement. Anna was granted primary custody, with the authority to determine their place of residence and the conditions of their education. The court specified arrangements for visitation and outlined the financial obligations of both parents, while allowing Anna broad discretion to protect her children's inheritance and social standing. These decisions were consistent with contemporary trends in French family law, which increasingly recognized the rights of mothers to direct the upbringing of minor children, especially in cases involving disputed fortunes or international jurisdiction. The divorce settlement also imposed ongoing financial restrictions on Boni de Castellane. The court ordered the sale of selected personal and marital property to satisfy outstanding debts, with the proceeds directed toward creditors and the maintenance of the children. Boni was prohibited from entering into further contracts or borrowing against assets controlled by Anna's trustees, and his future ability to claim support or compensation from Anna was formally circumscribed. The judgment reflected both the court's assessment of responsibility and the desire to provide closure to a case that had attracted extensive public attention. Enforcement of the settlement required cooperation between French and American legal institutions. Trustees based in New York continued to oversee the remaining Gould assets, while French officials managed the implementation of the court's orders regarding property and family arrangements. The international character of the case prompted further commentary in legal and financial circles, with experts citing the Gould-Castellane divorce as a reference point for the drafting of future transnational marriage contracts and the resolution of complex asset disputes. The resolution of the divorce settlement marked the formal end of Anna Gould's marriage to Boni de Castellane. The terms of the agreement reflected both the realities of financial loss and the limits of legal recourse in cases of marital breakdown. The case would serve as a precedent for similar disputes in the ensuing decades, reinforcing the need for clear contractual protections and robust legal oversight in marriages that bridged national and cultural divides. The outcome also set the stage for Anna's subsequent decisions regarding her children, her remaining fortune, and her public role as an American heiress in Europe. The divorce settlement between Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane included detailed provisions for the custody and upbringing of their 3 children, a matter that required negotiation across both French and American legal systems. Following the court's decision, Anna was granted principal custody, with the explicit authority to determine her children's residence, education, and guardianship arrangements. The legal documents specified that the children would remain in France under Anna's direct supervision, though the court acknowledged their dual citizenship and American inheritance rights. These arrangements were consistent with the prevailing trends in French family law during the early 20th century, which gave increasing weight to the mother's capacity to provide stability and continuity, particularly in cases involving contested estates or cross-national alliances. Anna, acting in accordance with both French court orders and the stipulations set by her American trustees, implemented a structured plan for her children's upbringing. This included private education conducted at home and later in elite French schools, complemented by language instruction, travel, and social training designed to prepare them for roles within both French and American society. The children's lives were closely supervised by Anna and a staff of tutors, governesses, and legal advisors, reflecting the family's desire to ensure their security and protect their interests against possible future claims from their father or other relatives. Anna's management of her children's upbringing was documented in correspondence with American trustees and family members, who remained attentive to the preservation of the children's inheritance and their rights under U.S. law. The question of inheritance was central to the post-divorce arrangements. The Gould family's American legal counsel worked to maintain the children's entitlements to their maternal inheritance, overseeing the administration of trusts and ensuring compliance with both U.S. and French regulations. Periodic reports were submitted to the New York-based trustees, who held principal authority over the disbursement of funds for education, living expenses, and eventual transfers upon reaching adulthood. These measures were deemed necessary to shield the children from the financial instability and legal complications associated with their father's debts and ongoing disputes. Visitation and communication between Boni de Castellane and his children were governed by the court's orders and the recommendations of appointed guardians. While occasional supervised visits were permitted, Anna retained significant control over the conditions under which such interactions occurred. Disputes regarding visitation rights occasionally surfaced in French courts, but the general pattern was one of limited and regulated contact, with Anna exercising her legal prerogative to prioritize the welfare and privacy of her children. As the children matured, they assumed increasingly independent roles within French society while remaining beneficiaries of the Gould estate in America. Their dual heritage, American by birthright and French by upbringing, was reflected in their participation in social events, educational achievements, and eventual marriages into other prominent families. The effective management of their identity and inheritance set a precedent for the resolution of cross-national family disputes in similar cases, emphasizing the importance of robust legal frameworks and coordinated oversight in protecting the interests of children born into transatlantic unions. The arrangements put in place after Anna and Boni's divorce thus secured the immediate welfare of the Castellane Gould children while safeguarding their inheritance and social status. These provisions would prove durable in the decades that followed, providing a model for other families navigating the complexities of international marriage, child custody, and cross-border inheritance in an increasingly interconnected world. In 1908, 2 years after her legal separation and divorce from Count Boni de Castellane, Anna Gould entered into a second marriage with Élie de Talleyrand-Périgord, the Duke of Sagan. The union was announced discreetly, in contrast to the public spectacle that had surrounded her first wedding. The Talleyrand-Périgord family, whose lineage included diplomats, statesmen, and notable figures of the French aristocracy, provided a measure of stability and continuity that contrasted with the turbulence of Anna's earlier marital experience. The marriage contract was carefully negotiated, with American and French legal advisors ensuring the protection of Anna's remaining fortune and the inheritance rights of her children from her first marriage. The circumstances of Anna's remarriage reflected the lessons learned from her prior experience. Provisions were made to segregate her assets, with the continued oversight of American trustees and the explicit exclusion of her new husband from any direct control over the principal Gould estate. French authorities recognized the unique legal position of Anna's fortune, and the settlement arrangements avoided the pitfalls that had contributed to the financial collapse of her first marriage. The couple resided primarily in France, dividing their time between Paris and family estates, and maintained a lower profile than that which characterized Anna's years with Boni de Castellane. Within Parisian and expatriate society, Anna's remarriage was received with a mixture of curiosity and approval. The Duke of Sagan's reputation for discretion and his established social position contributed to a restoration of Anna's standing in elite circles. Invitations to official events, charity galas, and private gatherings resumed, although the scale and frequency of public entertainments were more restrained. Anna resumed her involvement in philanthropic activities, supporting causes related to child welfare, education, and the Dowry arts. Her public appearances, while noted by the press, were managed with an emphasis on moderation and dignity, reflecting a conscious effort to distance herself from the excesses and controversies of her previous marriage. The management of Anna's relationship with her children from her first marriage was a continued priority. Arrangements were maintained to ensure their financial security, education, and eventual integration into both American and French society. Anna's correspondence with trustees and legal advisors documents the ongoing supervision of her children's interests and her efforts to facilitate their participation in both familial and social obligations. The stability afforded by her second marriage was regarded as beneficial to her children's development, reducing the risk of further legal disputes or challenges to their inheritance. The Duke of Sagan's acceptance of Anna's legal and financial arrangements was notable in the context of prevailing aristocratic attitudes toward marriage and wealth. The couple's agreement to maintain separate property and to uphold the legal independence of Anna's estate set an example that would be followed by other transnational unions in the years to come. The experience of Anna's remarriage contributed to evolving norms in both French and American society regarding the legal structuring of marital relationships, the protection of family wealth, and the rights of women to direct their own financial affairs. The years following Anna's second marriage were marked by increased privacy, restored reputation, and a more sustainable engagement with public life. The transition from scandal and litigation to stability and social rehabilitation allowed Anna Gould to consolidate her position within both the Talleyrand-Périgord family and the wider circles of Franco-American society, concluding a significant chapter in the ongoing history of transatlantic unions and elite inheritance. The high-profile legal battles between Anna Gould and Count Boni de Castellane, followed by Anna's remarriage to the Duke of Sagan, generated sustained attention in legal, diplomatic, and academic circles on both sides of the Atlantic. The complexity of the Gould-Castellane case, spanning multiple jurisdictions, involving substantial sums, and exposing the limitations of existing marriage and property laws, prompted calls for reform in the drafting and enforcement of dowry contracts and prenuptial agreements, particularly for unions that crossed national borders. Legal scholars and lawmakers cited the case as a foundational example of the risks faced by heiresses and families in the absence of robust, enforceable legal protections. In France, the proceedings revealed the inadequacy of traditional marital property regimes when confronted with international fortunes and contractual complexities. Anna Gould's experience underscored the importance of establishing explicit terms for the use investment, and inheritance of dowries, as well as clear guidelines for asset division in the event of separation or divorce. French legal commentary in the years after the case advocated for the greater use of contractually detailed marriage settlements, an expansion of judicial oversight in international cases, and increased collaboration between courts in different countries. The French legislature responded by reviewing statutory provisions related to marriage contracts, with particular focus on protecting the rights of women and the interests of foreign nationals marrying into French families. In the United States, the Gould case became a reference point for legal advisors counseling wealthy families with international ambitions. The use of trusts, oversight by independent trustees, and the insistence on contractual safeguards before marriage were reinforced as best practices. Financial and legal periodicals published analyses of the litigation, highlighting the vulnerabilities inherent in international unions and the need for vigilance in negotiating dowry arrangements. The New York Bar and other professional organizations cited the case in discussions of cross-border estate planning, prompting a re-examination of how American assets might be shielded from adverse foreign judgments or dissipation through mismanagement. The collaboration between American trustees and French courts in enforcing the terms of Anna Gould's original marriage contract established an important precedent. Future cases involving transatlantic or multinational marriages frequently cited the Gould-Castellane litigation as authority for the recognition of foreign trusts and for the enforceability of prenuptial agreements drafted under non-French law. The case's documentation, contracts, judicial decisions, and correspondence entered the legal canon, shaping the professional education of lawyers and influencing the drafting of subsequent family law statutes in both countries. Legal reform was also influenced by the growing number of similar cases arising from the continued trend of American heiresses marrying European nobles or industrialists. Policymakers and commentators stress the need for updated legal instruments capable of addressing the unique risks associated with such unions, including the protection of children's inheritance rights and the clarity of procedures in cases of marital breakdown. The case's impact extended to diplomatic discussions concerning the recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments and the proper venue for litigation. Anna Gould's experience and the legal architecture that evolved in response marked a watershed in the development of international marital law. The legacy of her litigation contributed to greater transparency, accountability, and predictability in cross-border marriage arrangements, ensuring that the lessons learned from her financial and legal ordeals would inform and protect future generations navigating similar paths. The dowry question, once the domain of family negotiation and social custom, became a subject of legislative action and judicial precedent, reshaping the boundaries of wealth, marriage, and law in the 20th century. In the years following the legal dissolution of her marriage to Count Boni de Castellane and her subsequent remarriage, Anna Gould's story became a staple in the public imagination on both sides of the Atlantic. The Castellane-Gould saga was repeatedly referenced in the press, memoirs, and social chronicles as a paradigmatic example of the risks and consequences of transatlantic marriages between American heiresses and European aristocrats. Editors and columnists, reflecting on decades of dollar princess alliances, cited Anna Gould's experience to illustrate the volatility and complexity of blending immense New World wealth with the expectations and demands of Old World nobility. The narrative was reinforced through an array of popular cultural forms. Satirical cartoons and serialized articles appeared in widely circulated newspapers and magazines, often lampooning the excesses of the Palais Rose, the spectacular social events, and the dramatic legal disputes that followed. Fictionalized versions of Anna's life emerged in novels and stage plays, adapting the facts of her marriages and divorces to suit changing tastes and moral sensibilities. Public fascination centered on themes of ambition, betrayal, cultural difference, and the limits of wealth as a guarantor of happiness or stability. These representations were not always sympathetic, and at times exaggerated or distorted events for dramatic effect, but they ensured that Anna Gould's name remained well known in elite and popular circles alike. In the United States, Anna's story was invoked in debates over the stewardship of family fortunes, the perils of marrying for social status, and the enduring anxieties about the legitimacy of Gilded Age wealth. Social historians and commentators traced parallels between her experience and that of other heiresses, whose fortunes had become entangled in litigation or dissipated through mismanagement. The Gould-Castellane case was cited as evidence of the need for ongoing legal and institutional reform to protect the interests of women and children in cross-border unions. In France, Anna Gould's legacy was interwoven with broader cultural discussions about the transformation of the aristocracy and the role of American capital in revitalizing, or in some views, undermining, traditional social structures. The Castellane name, once synonymous with inherited distinction, became linked in public memory to the risks of dependency on external wealth and the reputational hazards of financial scandal. The Palais Rose itself became an object of fascination for architectural historians and cultural critics, who assessed its significance as both an artifact of Belle Époque ambition and a symbol of ephemeral extravagance. Museums, archives, and private collections retain documents, photographs, and artifacts related to Anna Gould and her families. These materials were incorporated into exhibitions on the Gilded Age, transatlantic relations, and the evolution of marriage and property law. Scholars continued to analyze the case for its insights into gender, class, and the mechanisms of international social mobility. The persistence of Anna Gould's story in public memory and cultural production reflected the enduring resonance of her experience. Her marriages, legal battles, and public trials embodied the opportunities and hazards faced by those who bridged continents and classes at the turn of the 20th century. The Castellane-Gould case, both as historical fact and as cultural myth, contributed to ongoing conversations about the nature of wealth, the boundaries of social aspiration, and the forces shaping the modern history of families and fortunes. After the legal and public turmoil that defined her first marriage and its aftermath, Anna Gould's later years were marked by a sustained effort to maintain privacy, rebuild familial stability, and steward her remaining assets. The period following her 1908 remarriage to Élie de Talleyrand-Périgord, Duke of Sagan, signaled a transition from conspicuous public engagement to a more measured and reserved existence within both French and American social frameworks. The couple resided primarily in France, dividing their time between residences in Paris and the Talleyrand-Périgord country estates, while avoiding the extravagant entertainments and ostentatious displays that had characterized Anna's earlier life with Count Boni de Castellane. The management of family affairs became a central focus for Anna. She continued to supervise the education and social integration of her children from both marriages, ensuring their participation in elite educational institutions and providing them with the cultural fluency required to navigate both French and American society. Anna maintained regular correspondence with trustees and advisors in New York, overseeing the administration of trusts, monitoring investments, and directing the distribution of income for family and philanthropic purposes. Legal and financial oversight remained stringent, a legacy of the hard-learned lessons from her first marriage and subsequent litigation. Anna's engagement in philanthropy evolved during these years. She contributed to charitable causes in France, particularly those associated with child welfare, education, and public health. Her donations were generally made with an insistence on discretion, and her participation in public events was limited to those occasions where her presence was required as part of the Talleyrand-Périgord family's obligations. In this way, Anna maintained her social commitments while avoiding renewed media attention or controversy. The outbreak of World War I and the changing social and economic landscape of early 20th century Europe further altered the context of Anna's life. The war placed new demands on aristocratic households, many of which became involved in relief efforts or faced requisition of property for military use. Anna and her husband provided support for wartime charities and adapted to the disruptions brought by the conflict, which included travel restrictions, increased financial oversight, and broader uncertainty about the future of inherited wealth and social hierarchy. The interwar years brought additional adjustments. As European aristocracy experienced further contraction of influence and resources, Anna prioritized the protection of her children's inheritance and the maintenance of family estates. She relied on an established network of legal and financial advisors, both in France and the United States, to adapt to evolving regulations and shifting markets. The death of close family members, changes in inheritance law, and the challenges of managing property abroad required ongoing diligence. Anna's later correspondence and surviving documents suggest a life increasingly centered on family, personal interests, and the quiet management of legacy. She maintained connections with American relatives, welcomed grandchildren into the family, and preserved the memory of her parents' and siblings' achievements. Despite the passage of decades since her first marriage, the legal and financial structures established to protect her assets and her children's future remained in force, testifying to the enduring significance of the earlier crises in shaping the contours of her life. By the late 1950s, Anna Gould's public appearances had become rare, and she withdrew almost entirely from social functions outside immediate family obligations. The preservation of her papers and the orderly disposition of her estate reflected a lifelong preoccupation with the continuity of family and the security of future generations. Anna's later years, though less visible than her earlier decades, were defined by ongoing adaptation to personal and historical change, the safeguarding of legacy, and the pursuit of stability after a life repeatedly shaped by legal, social, and financial upheaval. Anna Gould died in Paris on November 30th, 1961, closing the final chapter of a life marked by public prominence, legal precedent, and complex transatlantic family history. Her passing was reported in major French and American newspapers, with obituaries reflecting on her origins as the daughter of Jay Gould, her marriages into the European aristocracy, and the lasting significance of her legal and financial experiences. Representatives of both the Talleyrand-Périgord and Castellane families attended her funeral, alongside descendants, family advisors, and figures associated with the institutions and charities she had supported in her later years. The administration of Anna Gould's estate was carried out in accordance with the legal arrangements established over the preceding decades. Trustees in New York and Paris coordinated the valuation and distribution of her remaining assets, which included property, securities, art, and personal effects. The disposition of her estate reflected the complexities of managing wealth and inheritance across multiple jurisdictions, and final settlements were guided by the precedents set in earlier litigation and by evolving French and American inheritance laws. The preservation of her legal and financial records facilitated the orderly transition of her assets to her children and grandchildren, with an emphasis on continuity and family stability. Historical assessments of Anna Gould's legacy have focused on her role as both a participant in and a symbol of the era's defining trends. Her marriage to Count Boni de Castellane, the subsequent legal conflicts, and her remarriage to the Duke of Sagan remain central case studies in the evolution of transatlantic marriage, dowry law, and the international management of family fortunes. The Castellane-Gould case is frequently cited in academic works on gender, class, and the globalization of social and legal norms at the turn of the 20th century. The architectural, cultural, and documentary artifacts associated with Anna Gould's life, ranging from the remnants of the Palais Rose to correspondence, photographs, and legal contracts, have entered public and private collections on both continents. These materials are used by scholars to reconstruct not only the details of Anna's personal history, but also the broader context of American-European relations, the transformation of aristocratic society, and the regulation of wealth in a period of rapid change. Exhibitions, publications, and historical retrospectives continue to revisit her experience as a lens through which to examine the shifting boundaries of status, marriage, and inheritance. Anna Gould's death concluded a life that, while shaped by privilege and adversity, exerted lasting influence over the legal and social frameworks governing family and fortune. Her ability to adapt to changing circumstances, navigate cross-cultural expectations, and secure her family's interests ensured her continued relevance in the historical record. The enduring interest in her story reflects not only the uniqueness of her circumstances, but also the persistence of the questions her life posed for law, society, and the intersection of wealth and identity in the modern era. Anna Gould's marriage to Count Boni de Castellane remains a defining episode in the annals of transatlantic unions, exposing the limitations of wealth as a guarantee of personal or social security. The structures of her dowry, the spectacle of her public life, and the legal consequences of her divorce served as milestones in the evolution of marital, financial, and gender norms. Her subsequent choices, remarriage, legal advocacy, and family stewardship, demonstrated both resilience and adaptation in the face of public scrutiny and personal adversity. The legacy of Anna Gould's experiences continues to shape academic research, legal practice, and cultural memory, offering critical insight into the broader dynamics of class, gender, and international relations in the early 20th century.